Hello YouTube from not so sunny Balham in South London today. So I've just finished off this delightful, let me see, a bit of pasta with quinoa and pea pasta with some of Laurie's kimchi, which if you're in and around a health food shop in London, I think England, you can get hold of. Brilliant for the gut. So lots and lots of good stuff in there. I'll probably talk at some point later about the benefits there. But today I want to talk about fats, building on the previous components of diet we've discussed before. So if you haven't seen the videos on protein, fruits and vegetables and carbohydrates, I'd start with those first and get a kind of understanding of the benefits there. And once you've got those in place, I think it's really important to consider fats. And you can always argue about the importance of some of these. Some people say fats are much more important than proteins, and up and down. And you can definitely make a case for that. I mean, I'd say we're built out of protein, but you can't really think straight without the correct amount of fat. And you can't reproduce without the right amount of fat. So fat's pretty important. So saturated fat gets a very bad rap. And saturated fat is essential so that we can produce our sex hormones. So if you don't get enough saturated fat, you can't produce your hormones and you can't respond to stress, and you'll struggle to survive a normal day, you'll struggle to think straight, you won't feel right. And some people, a common symptom on people on a very low fat diet is psychological problems. So it's a very serious thing to consider, is making sure you're getting enough quality fats in your diet. In men, it's quite easy to judge, or as a very good sign anyway, if you're not getting enough fat, is that you don't get a morning erection, or at least a semi. In women, I'm not aware of a specific symptom, but I think sex drive has been mooted, but it's not as well established. It's not sort of a known risk factor. So for men, though, it's a very easy way of judging. Now, there can be obviously a lot of other factors involved in sex hormone production, but that's, for most men, that's a good general guide to kind of checking that you're getting enough. How much is enough is a really good question. So somewhere between 40 grams of fat for somebody who's about 60 kilos, up to sort of, say, between 70 and 80 grams of fat for someone who's around my size, sort of in the 80 to 90 kilo range. And then the main source of fats we really want to look at is omega-3s, and they're often something that people struggle with. So the main symptoms of omega-3 deficiency are dry eyes and little bumps on the back of the tricep along here. So if you have both of those, omega-3s is definitely something to look at. Now, the World Health Organization recommends between 1 and 2 grams a week to avoid deficiency, and they'll say to get a couple of pieces of oily fish in a week, which is really sound advice for kind of avoiding deficiency, not necessarily for optimal health. You tend to see quite regularly, I come across people with dry eyes and the little bumps in the back of the arm, and those symptoms clear up straight away when they supplement with omega-3s. Now, omega-3 supplementation is a controversial area. In the short term, it's almost unequivocally a panacea for almost everything, because it just restores homeostasis in so many functions, because omega-3s are fundamental to cellular health and how each cell functions. So it affects so much, from our cognition to inflammation to pain mechanisms. It really can help with almost most things. But the long-term research is a bit concerning, and there is concerns with long-term consumption of omega-3s that it can increase cancer risk. So it's not something I would recommend ever taking long-term. And by long-term, I personally mean certainly longer than 6 months, because it is very easy to get from dietary sources as well. For almost everybody can stomach something that's high in omega-3s, but more to come on that later. And short-term supplementation, something in the neck of the woods of 2 grams of actual omega-3s in total, ideally from kind of fish-based sources, your icosapentaenoics or your docosahexaenoic acids, your EPAs and DHAs, which you'll see on the back of the capsules. And look, get about 2 grams in a day until your symptoms clear up, and then I'd stop taking omega-3 capsules and move on to dietary sources. So the best dietary sources are fish, is your ideal source, so looking at mackerel, sardines, salmon, but it's got to be oily fish in cold water, because the omega-3s keep the blood thin in cold water, and that's why cold water fish have more. And now, some cold water fish don't have as much as others. So, for example, fish like pollock, haddock, and cod don't have as much. But salmon is particularly good. Sardines and mackerel are very good. So, for example, 50 grams of salmon will give you about 1 gram of omega-3s, which is a really good dose. And it's the same in smoked salmon and tinned salmon as it is in fresh salmon. Obviously, we'd rather get it from fresh salmon from an overall general health perspective, but to have it a little bit every day with your eggs appears to be fine. And one downside with consuming salmon is the mercury content. So there is generally considered to be a fair bit of mercury in salmon. But on myself, I have salmon very, very frequently, sort of at least 3, if not close to 7 times a week, if I'm sort of at home in London. And on my blood work, having done that for over a year, I've seen no elevation in mercury. And in the blood work of people I have seen with an elevation in mercury, where it gets to a significant level, that's normally, has always been in people who have mercury fillings in their teeth. I've never personally seen it come from purely dietary sources. I do know of a lot of stories of people who have got elevated mercury from dietary sources, but these are normally people considering the bigger fish, like for example, like a lot of tuna and a lot of swordfish, which concentrate even higher quantities of mercury. So I think if you stick with the lower end, you're not likely to see anything. If you do start experiencing that mental confusion, muscle tremors, those are 2 of the main symptoms of mercury deficiency, mercury excess, toxicity, then it is worth getting your blood checked, and you might have to go on a bit of protocol to get rid of that, which is a bit of hard work, and those aren't nice symptoms. But I haven't seen anything in short term, certainly in like 1 to 2 years of consumption of significant amounts of salmon, and I haven't seen in myself, and in clients I haven't seen anything when it's been going for a lot longer than that. And you haven't heard of kind of reports from other sources where it's more salmon based. It's more when it's the bigger fish, particularly tuna and swordfish. Swordfish being the main one. So then your other good sources of omega-3s are flax seeds and chia seeds, are both really good. So a tablespoon of each will give you about 1 gram of omega-3s. Now, it's not as good in terms of the ease with which it's processed in the body as getting it from fish-based sources. It's still a really good source. It just has to go through a few metabolic processes before it's available to use for everything the body needs to use it for. And this makes it a really easy way to get it. Certainly in the UK, a company called Linwood's have made milled flax seeds widely available in all major supermarkets. And adding a tablespoon of that to, like, say, 100 grams of yogurt and a bit of Manuka honey is a genuinely nutritious treat. For most people, consider it a treat. It's very tasty. Most of my clients would say, and that's quite a nice way to get your omega-3s in. Or even a simple chia seed pudding, which can be done very nutritiously. A lot of fibre in there as well. And even just before this, I had one of these lovely little drinks by a company called Wow. And this tiny little 250ml container actually contains 2.5 grams of omega-3s, which is a lot. You'd be popping a lot of omega-3 capsules to hit that amount. So I very firmly recommend you get your omega-3s from dietary sources rather than supplemental sources, because it is so easy. So either from flax seeds, chia seeds, or from salmon. There are other options, but those are some of the easier ones. And generally, we should avoid being too fat phobic. So I don't like to put people off getting too much fat, but as part of tracking, particularly if you're looking to lose weight, obviously fat is very high in calories, and so keeping fat consumption to kind of, particularly saturated fat consumption, just to a necessary level so that we feel good and not having too much is generally good advice, whilst making sure we get enough omega-3s in so that we feel good, don't have any side effects. A little bit more on the omega-3 side of things is just to consider that historically, sort of our ancestral diets were somewhere between a balance of 1-to-1 of omega-6s to omega-3s, whereas now it's somewhere closer to 1-to-16 of omega-3s to omega-6s. And this omega-6s have more of a pro-inflammatory effect on our eicosanoids, our little sort of hormone-like molecules that signal things down within our bloodstream. And the more pro-inflammatory we go, the more set up we are to feel pain and feel more pro-inflammatory conditions, which is all your cardiovascular problems, even associated with cancer and heart disease and most conditions, and generally a state of sort of being out of homeostasis. So the more we can sort of switch our diet to provide a more balanced combination of omega-3s to omega-6s, the better. So rather than looking for that World Health Organization sort of 2 grams a week, I would encourage people to get in at sort of more like 1 gram a day, maybe even a bit more where it's kind of easily available, so we can balance out our omega-3s to omega-6s. Some of the sources, it's very easy to get a lot of omega-6s, because even foods which we consider good, like pumpkin seeds are a fantastic food, and 100 grams of pumpkin seeds will give you 400 milligrams of magnesium, but they are higher in omega-6s to omega-3s. So they're actually going to be pushing that ratio in a negative way. Although I would still say they're a fantastic food, it's just that we need to make sure we're getting our omega-3s in on top. Same with something like a Brazil nut. It's a good way of getting some omega-3s in, but it provides more omega-6s, and so it's still pushing that balance in a negative way. So whilst I wouldn't put people off having Brazil nuts, they're fantastic, highly nutritious food. You should just make sure you get something that's a bit more omega-3 dominant, like flax seeds, chia seeds, or some good salmon or mackerel, sardines in, to actually make sure you're shifting that balance in a positive direction. Quick word on nuts. In some of my more health conscious clients, you sometimes see weight struggles when they do overconsume nuts, and I know I've seen this in myself. Nuts are delicious and highly nutritious, but also quite calorific. And whilst weight loss is a very complex area, it is as simple as calories in, calories out. It's just that equation is incredibly complex, and there's a lot of things that vary our metabolism, affecting that calories out component. So just monitor if you are struggling with your weight at all. I wouldn't say that fats are still really, really good for you, but you just want to make sure you're getting enough good fats that you feel good and your body works well, but you're not going crazy. The only time you can get a bit more liberal on fat is if you're going specifically for a more ketogenic diet, but this advice is very much geared towards more standard nutrition advice and giving a kind of good basis for what I consider a healthy diet. And we know on the basis of the literature and what the human body needs, it's just the basics for feeling good and functioning well as a human being. So hopefully that's of some use and backs up some other bits and interesting stuff you've read in the past. Any questions, email me at Kieran@kieranmacphail.com, and or comment and questions. See you later. Bye.